In this video, I'm going to talk about the main trends and prospects of Africa by 2030. So, Africa is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and in demographic terms, it is expected that in 2030 the total population will grow up to 2 billion more than nowadays. And nowadays they are like 1.2 billion people. Um, with regard to urbanization, sub-Saharan African countries are experiencing a fast urban transition. For example, megacities are starting to get a lot of prominence as most of African people are fleeing to urban areas in order to get adequate and stable jobs, but also basic needs. So, however, this could create more inequalities in these areas, as there won't be enough resources like to meet all these people. And but also this could create housing shortages, traffic congestion, pollution, etc. So urban dwellers will also, in 2010 was nearly 40%, and it's expected to rise up to 50% by 2030. So with regard to economy of sub-Saharan Africa, it will also increase in the following years, and extreme poverty will be eliminated up to only 25% by 2030, according to the African Development Bank. So, a decline of this poverty would require the continent to grow at an average of 7%. And due to this continued growth in this region, around 74% of Africans will also be in the working age. And economic and population growth will be like related with rapid migration and urbanization. For example, this change from rural to urban areas will be key for economic development, but at the same time they will have to diversify their economies. Furthermore, the middle class is also expected to increase in the following years. For example, it increased from 34% in 2010, and it's expected to grow up to 42% in 2030. With regard to the GDP in Africa, the African Bank estimates that from a base of 1.7 trillion US dollars in 2010, it will increase to over 3 trillion or 2.5 trillion in 2030 or 2040. This means that Africa will need more investment in the following years in order to make sure that economic growth will remain stabilized, for example, in education, healthcare, etc. Moreover, the UN also estimates that in 2030 the foreign direct investment in Africa will be quadrupled as of now, which is 73.5 billion in 2015. Child mortality is also expected to decline from 127 per 1,000 deaths in 2010 to 45 per 1,000 deaths in 2040. This will mean that Africa will have more access to basic needs such as water supply and sanitation. And sub-Saharan Africa nowadays accounts for over two-thirds of the global burden of infectious and parasitic diseases, and 9 out of every 10 child deaths are due to malaria. So HIV remains one of the most essential challenges for Africa for the following years, but in particularly sub-Saharan Africa. HIV rates are expected to decline from 2.1% in 2010 to 1.4% in 2030. So HIV deaths per 100,000 people will be of almost 100, and in 2060, for example, only 20. The life expectancy in Africa is also projected to reach 62 years by 2030, and now the average is like 55. Aid will also decrease in the following years, and new players will be present in the aid industry, such as private enterprises, international NGOs, etc. With regard to education, it will also increase by 2030. For example, adult literacy rates are expected to increase by 85% in 2030, and Africa will be very close to Indian levels in the following years, if we compare it in economic terms. And related to political changes, Africa's protests will also increase, and many people will manifest like their beliefs and will bring more innovative ideas of change, but also political and democratic ways of governing these countries. And furthermore, if we look at the environment of Africa, and in particular sub-Saharan Africa, climate change will remain like a global threat, and in particularly in countries of sub-Saharan Africa. It is expected like that at the end of this of the 21st century, there will be 4 degrees more in Earth. So these changes, for example, will like be increased water stress, for example, up to 350 to 600 million in 2030. These changes will also affect agriculture, which is likely to decline, and democratization has also become really important nowadays. For example, in 2011 there were 18 countries being democratized and being engaged with electoral democracies, and it is expected to grow in the following years. And finally, by 2030, there will be less armed conflicts, but at the same time more political violence in sub-Saharan Africa.